Yeah, I have it down here in front of me. I have some notes. So the first one is what was your experience of the readings and exercises? And then the second one was what new learnings did these readings give you that you can carry forward in that class? Does anyone want to start? I'll go first.
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess for the first question, which is my experience, I think for both week 1 and 2, I found the readings really helpful for me. Especially the Canadian facts one, I think it really stood out to me because of how it showed that how it described income as one of the most important social determinants of health. I think the report really gave clear evidence of people with higher incomes, like they live longer and healthier lives versus of those who don't, and they're coming from lower income families, and they're also risk to much greater health risks. So yeah, that really made me think about how health isn't just about an individual's choices, but also what kind of conditions they're coming from. So yeah, that was one of a good experience. Also, the call to action one, the truth and reconciliation reading. Yeah, I think that was also it left like a strong impression on me. How it described like healthcare providers should also like recognize indigenous healing practices and how to use those alongside Western medicines and approaches. And yeah, it really showed me how reconciliation in healthcare could require actions and not just awareness. So that was a nice experience. And yeah, also the Northern Health video about cultural safety was, I found pretty intuitive as well. How it addressed like we shouldn't let patients feel excluded in terms of power imbalances and like yeah, even something small like assuming all patients share same kind of traditions, like all indigenous people, even though they come from different tribes and different locations, could have different traditions, right? So we need to recognize that. And yeah, that cultural safety isn't just about knowing facts, it's also about embracing it and about self-reflection.
Yeah.
And yeah, how we act on these relationships. And yeah, from last week, the intersectionality and positionality material, I found it really good. The spirograph one and the power wheel diagram really showed me how the identity factors like gender and race, these kind of things really shape people's access to power or just exposure to their disadvantages, right? And yeah, from someone who comes from like who's like a person of color, it really resonates with me because like I see how complex people's lifestyles could be, and yeah, it's beyond just one label, and like it's like a mixture of so many things that comes together. So
yeah, definitely.
And
oh, go
sorry,
ahead. No, go ahead.
now I was just gonna move on to the next question.
Yeah, the piggybacking off of what you said, with all of the readings from both week 1 and week 2, it really felt like there was a huge push to confront that invisible power structure and the structure of privilege, and it kind of forced engagement in that and to like realize privilege within all aspects. And I also I in the back of my head knew that health is not just like the your physical health, but I really liked how some of the readings pointed to health is determined by so many factors and we're not addressing those factors. And that was really interesting to me. And the whole aspect of needing to change the structure instead of the individual. And yeah, and like you said, having those indigenous ways of knowing melting into health practice is super important, and having like, I think one of the readings mentioned having an Indigenous elder to provide services that are necessary for people, but we don't have them as available. And I think like healthcare and all was built by men, kind of for men, and white cis men. So we, as a society, as individuals, all have to focus on trying to break that down a little bit. And I think the readings really encourage that, in my view. But yeah.
For sure. I think for me, I mean, I feel like we all kind of have a similar concept of it. I think for me, like, I very much am like fitness and like move your body, and that's good for you, and eating healthy. So I really think listening to like the idea that like living conditions and like your income and like how much support you can get from the community depending on like where you're located and things like that, or your background, like that was a very different perspective for me to like think about, that that's like an overall like bigger picture of what impacts your health and like living situation way more, and just your overall like lifespan. And then that like kind of ties more into all of the readings in general. Like I feel like each of them kind of brings up a different point to bring into like one big picture of just like diversity and inclusion and like all different cultures and how all of them are a bit different. And I think bringing up like the Indigenous background, I grew up in Vancouver, so like growing up we had every single year we learned a bit more about First Nations and like their background and their history and like how things have changed. And I think definitely Canada has put things like in place to like bring things back, or like to apologize and reconcile and all these things. But at the end of the day, like thinking that like where they're living now and how different that is from like how it was many years ago when we first came here as settlers, that's never really going to be the same, which is going to change the way they live and how they survived. And I think that's really something to like take notice of, like you were saying, like with the elders, like when they grow up, like their parents don't raise them, the elders raise them because they have the most knowledge and things like that. And that's just very different from other people's culture, which isn't a good or a bad thing, but everyone can like take from that and like add that into how they live. And like I feel like everything can like be strengthened by one another.
Yeah, definitely. That's the whole in another class we learned really deeply about Indigenous ways of knowing, and how you can tie them into every aspect of your life, and like the medicine wheel kind of shows that as well. And it is they are Indigenous concepts, but they are concepts that should be taken seriously, and I don't think they're taken seriously in a lot of realms. And like, yeah, you were saying I grew up in Vancouver and Victoria, and I'm a bit older, but when I was younger, we learned nothing about Indigenous kids, like nothing. And once I got to high school, we learned a bit more, and that's kind of when the government was starting to kickstart a whole bunch of reconciliation initiatives. But in my mind, reconciliation is an extremely important thing, and it should be definitely done, but it's not enough. Like saying apologizing and giving what is owed is necessary, but we need to build on that. We need to actually lift Indigenous people up and have them at a level playing field, because right now it's not. And like
100%.
Yeah,
and I just think like BC specifically, that's such a like big part of our background, and that's coming up like more and more now. But like you were saying, like younger generations are now more aware of it, but like things like the medicine wheel or things that like I've learned in elementary and high school and like all these little things, like I agree with that. That's the point of view that I grew up learning. But like someone else, they might be like, no, that's not true. Like that's a bad habit. When really actually like strengthen our healthcare or strengthen the way you live, but that's just like from your perspective.
Yeah, that's totally the positionality of it. Like my parents' generation, my kind of generation to a point, we were colonialism was ingrained in us, and there was like I've heard it from people I know or knew, and people like I grew up with, and family members that were older than me. There is still such a prejudice, and it is such a built, like, completely false narrative that was just, it was the chosen narrative that we were all given, and it's going to take a while to dismantle that. And I think, yeah, like a great step is to try to integrate Indigenous ways of knowing into healthcare and all aspects of health. Like, that's super important.
Even just like using the land, like there's so much now with like environmental things. And like I always remember in high school, like being in a First Peoples class and them explaining to me like they have different rituals to like with like forest fires and this and that, but like we're taking into account that like we should try that. Like the things we know aren't working, but we're going to keep doing them. Yeah. Ingrained in our body as this is right and everything else is wrong. This is what I should be doing.
Yeah, that's, I think, totally that colonialistic viewpoint and that narrative that that as settlers we were all taught. And it's unfortunately, like, it takes a lot of focus on internal change and humility and like self-reflection, and that's a huge part of also like cultural safety and ensuring that we're building a safe environment for all like Indigenous people, but all minorities, all like people who are at a disadvantage already. We need to make sure that we are like, again, leveling the playing field, and we're not looking at everybody as like, oh, we're all the same, woohoo. Like I was always taught like, oh, you don't see color. That was what I was taught when I was young. And now you can, like, I don't think anyone's really taught that anymore, but now it's, no, you see color because you see the disadvantages. You have to acknowledge your privilege. You can't just go, oh, everything's fine. You have to acknowledge your privilege and see what needs to be done. And I think we're still kind of working on that, but I think from my perspective and my growing up, it has gotten a lot more, people have gotten a lot more aware, which is really neat to kind of see. I think
it takes time, like it's so ingrained in me. Yeah, like exams and like learning about history, and this is what is correct. And then all of a sudden these new perspectives are coming in, and it's like, but that's, to me, the knowledge that I've been taught by all these people, it's so different. And like, I feel like some people are unsure of like trusting it or like choosing. You have to choose to like accept that or not.
Yeah, but I think this change is coming slowly and steadily. Like now we see that people are finally accepting and acknowledging the differences, and like you said, acknowledging color and acknowledging that we need to reconcile with the Indigenous people. Like even in healthcare now, people are starting to, like, there's centers for spiritual beliefs and like taking that route for their treatment options more than what is like generally known as the right way of healthcare. Yeah, we're seeing some changes now, and it's going in the right direction, so it's great.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think for me, based off of like all of that, going to like the second kind of like prompt idea of like what I'm going to carry forward is just like looking at the like different perspective of like health comes from like support, money, food, like your living situation more than like physically and like mentally, because all those things affect that and the opportunities you have. So I think carrying that forward into like the rest of this class, I think I'll be keeping that in mind.
Yeah, I agree with you, and that's also one thing I would like to move forward in class with. Also, like, health requires more of community engagement as well, so that's something I would like to carry forward in my learnings, having a collaborative approach and benefiting in the health promotions, I guess, starting in early stages rather than later. Like, for example, there are cancer groups for people affected with cancer, right? But like if promotions were, and like we've acknowledged that early stage cancer or just cancer prevention, I think that's like a good way to promote good health and like how to like not spread cancer, but like other epidemic problems and stuff that should be really talked about. And another thing I would like to carry forward is acknowledging the power imbalances and to make patients feel safe and not just being culturally aware. I think, yeah, that's something I would like to carry forward in our group discussions as well.
Yeah, that you kind of hit all the points, but I really want to focus on ensuring that I'm seeing everything as a structural problem and not an individual problem. And it's not a individual's responsibility to fix a structural problem. It's not their problem that our structure is completely ignoring multiple groups. And I really want to make sure I'm keeping that and